To begin, I just want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our presentation this evening about permaculture and the it's called the, what did you call it, Peter? The intro to
An intro
permaculture?
to an intro. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Before we start our presentation, before I do my introduction of our speaker, I just want to do our land acknowledgement. And so I want to acknowledge that we are here on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg Nation. Those are the people of the three fires known as the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations. And we also want to give thanks to the Chippewas of Nawash and the Chippewas of Saugeen, who are now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. And we like to recognize also the Métis Nation of Ontario have a rich history here on the Saugeen Peninsula. So that's where we are for this evening. And if you want to just sort of think about and acknowledge the people who are the keepers of the land wherever you are right now, that would be very appropriate as well. And I also just need to acknowledge that we are able to do these presentations because of a grant that we received from the government of Ontario called the Seniors Community Grant. All right, so to begin, we have Peter Allemang with us tonight to talk about permaculture. Peter is there in the window if you can see him, and he lives and has lived for quite some time now at a place called the Bird's Nest Garden Farm. If you ever happen to drive up to Nashwaaming, just as you're going around the corner before you come down the hill, you will see a really cool round building sort of back off into the forest a little bit. And that is Bird's Nest Farm. Peter and his family live off grid, and they've been farming and doing permaculture there for about 20 years. Peter himself is an environmental educator as well at the Outdoor Education Center just outside of Oliphant. So lots of knowledge to share with us this evening, and we're really happy to have Peter here. So welcome, Peter. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me, Tara, and all the supporters at the Copos WI. I do have a lot to share. There are permaculture introduction courses that last, I was saying to Tara, a day or a weekend. So we're going to cram it into much less than an hour. That being said, I might go at sometimes a borderline disturbing speed. So if so, you can, Tara will probably tell me in some way, shape, or form, or my wife Erin will, and I'll slow down a little bit, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. So that's what we looked like in the picture there. I'm in the middle and Erin's on the right-hand side, just in case you see us at the WI or in the streets of Wyerton, or I don't know. So what is permaculture? And I love this quote I found. It's very actually difficult to distill into a short presentation, but I did my best. And I love this quote by the founder, the co-founder, Bill Mollison, who said, with his Australian accent, which I will try to approximate, "I'm certain I don't know what permaculture is. That's what I like about it. It's not dogmatic. You've got to say it's about the only organized system of design that ever was. And that makes it extremely eerie." So I think if somebody has a sense of humor about some of their most important life's work, that's a good thing. But to me, permaculture distilled is it enables you to see the world through a certain set of rose-colored glasses, which I particularly like. So we'll get into some more details subsequently. So other people say permaculture is revolution disguised as gardening. Well, what is it? A little more concretely, it seeks to apply the principles of ecology to the design of sustainable human habitats. It likes to encompass energy, health, education, community, architecture, economics, and more, and bring sustainability into all aspects of life. Pressed a little more closely, most ardent permaculturalists or permaculture design certificate holders will probably say something like, permaculture is a design science that pulls resources from nature, from traditional or indigenous systems, and from modern scientific and technical knowledge. So I pulled up one example with lots of pictures. Permaculture principle is the edge effect. And if you see the picture on the left, the edge effect explained, which I've shamelessly borrowed from Jeff Lawton without his permission, I apologize. But on the left-hand side of the picture is a forest, and on the right hand is a grassland, and in the middle is the edge or the ecotone or savanna. And then if you go to the top of my image in the Venn diagram where the two circles intersect, that's just a graphic representation of what's happening in terms of the productivity and the biodiversity of when species come together in an edge effect. So on the left, you have the forest species, plants and animals, the right, the prairie grassland species, and in the middle, the savanna, when you have species from those two spheres and species that are just endemic to a savanna, and you just have this crazy amount of productivity and biodiversity and beauty, I would add. The image on the bottom of the blue circle, that's just the representation of a pond with 100 square feet of surface area. And on the right, it still has 100 square feet of surface area, but when you push in the edges and pull out the edges, you get, instead of 35 meters of edge, you get 70 meters of edge. Well, how can we extend that thinking into other human systems, other designs? Well, lots of ways. The bottom right is just a little herb garden for maybe one person, but it's got these ins and outs to increase the edge. A little bigger scale above. It's an orchard, but it's not a normal orchard. You can tell by the colors of the trees that it's not just one species of apple. We've got probably lilacs and flowering crabs and apples and this and that. And that's integrated with at least some sort of pasture system. And then on the right-hand side are some probably berry shrubs. So you don't have the wavy effect, but you do have edges coming together, edges of productivity. So these two gentlemen were the sort of classical originators of the term permaculture, as it began as kind of a movement. But the ideas and the lifestyles contained within it were happening a long time before Bill Mollison and David Holmgren came upon this earth, for sure. And they borrowed heavily from some of those folks, of course, including indigenous cultures. So I've kind of highlighted four big seeds of permaculture progenitors, I guess. And I'll just talk about them a little bit. And of course, one of them is indigenous folks. And Mollison was very influenced by indigenous cultures and traditions and life ways and land management. And so are we. So I'm glad that Tara has already highlighted the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe that we're in, because that's incredibly important. I was just thinking tonight as I bundled myself up to turn my generator on and got buffeted by the wind. I mean, how hard is it and how valuable is it to survive generation after generation after generation in these forests and fields and waterways that a lot of us call home now? And how much do you learn, and how laudable it is to keep those ecological systems going and sustainable year after year. Very impressive. Mollison was, of course, indebted to the Indigenous people of Australia, especially, but he also pays homage to Celtic influences from his European ancestry, specifically with foodways and fermentation and preserving food and how to gather nutrition from food and all kinds of interesting things. So he wrote a book called The Permaculture Designer's Manual, which is kind of his Bible and is to a lot of permaculture classes and students and thinkers. And he had a revolutionary chapter called A Pattern Understanding, where he kind of outlines how pattern-based thinking was very common in ancient cultures and indigenous cultures. Using dance and song and body expression was a great way to disperse information, not just writing or reading a screen. And he felt that now we rely too heavily on sort of material-based thinking, linear A to B to C, reductionist, scientific method only. We need to swing to a better balance. And to represent that kind of impulse and those traditions, I put two images up on the screen. On the left is a savanna in Ontario, Black Oak Savanna, Alderville First Nation near Rice Lake, where the Anishinaabe folks there have kind of rediscovered or re-emphasized how to caretake a landscape to keep it open, but have trees and prairie plants and shrubs, and a very mammal friendly landscape. And of course, if you're living on the land, a lot of mammals can support you, even if you're sort of the kingpin mammal. And sort of the reverse of that, in some ways, the opposite side of the coin is the picture on the right. That's technically called the Chinampa, and that's close to modern day Mexico City. And that landscape style supported purportedly hundreds of thousands of Aztec people, a couple 100,000 for a long time. And they manipulated water, they drained or diverted creeks and probably small rivers, I'm not exactly sure, and made a version of Venice, but a Venice where you dig out some of the rich muck from the bottom of a channel, and you put it up in an organized island in the middle, and you plant things on it that you can eat. They're greens and trees with nuts and berries, and of course you've got fish in the water, and you can use fish after you eat them to fertilize the plant you're growing. It's just a really harmonious system with no waste. So Mollison and his protege David Holmgren just tried to emphasize all these brilliant traditional ways of doing these things in their writings and in classes. The second big permaculture or pre-permaculture seed I want to highlight is a man named J. Russell Smith, who was a professor of geography in the United States in the 1920s. He was very outspoken about what grain agriculture and destructive livestock grazing practices were doing to the vast natural soil capital of North America. It was being washed away at a crazy rate, leading to the Dust Bowl, and that led to his philosophy on how agriculture should be approached. And he wrote a book called Tree Crops, A Permanent Agriculture, after having traveled around to a bunch of different places, like the one I have in the pictures here, which is Corsica, an island in the Mediterranean. Aaron and I actually hope to go there in 2020, but this little thing called COVID got in the way. So we went to Quebec. Corsica is under French control, and so is Quebec. So there's a little bit of a leap there, but we learned lots of things in Quebec, but not what we would have in Corsica, which was how for a few hundred years, they had a really sustainable people, animal, and earth-friendly system. And what happened was Corsica was controlled in the 1600s by the nearest city-state, which was Genoa. They had their navy, they sailed across the straits to Corsica, took it over, and said, "Thou shalt do what we want you to do," which, according to one of their governors, was, I want every landholder, big and small, to plant 4 perennial plants: chestnuts, fig trees, olive trees, mulberries. And most of them did that, which meant they had mulberry fruit, fig fruit, olive fruit, and oil, and chestnuts, which is basically corn on a tree. But they never had to replant them. They just had to harvest them and manage them a little bit, of course. So they could make a diversity of food products from all those plants. And not only that, they could engage a lot of the animals to do a lot of the harvesting. The sheep and goats would eat some of the lower branches of trees as they were growing. And in the fall, the pigs would pick up the chestnuts or the acorns that were falling all over the place. And then the people could harvest the livestock. And it was just a very virtuous cycle. And it led to no erosion, essentially. And of course, work for everyone, and good work, of course, outside work, healthy work, not too onerous. No one was baking in the blazing sun all day, every day, like some of our modern systems. No one was breathing in toxic fumes. And I suspect it wasn't paradise, but be worth a semester checking that place out, I think. They have all kinds of food products even today that are very traditional. The culture did not stay pristine for more than a few hundred years. Modern lifestyles and concerns and industrialization has kind of mucked it up, but you can still go there today and experience a lot of the same impulses and traditions. The third big seed of permaculture I want to highlight is a Japanese man named Masanobu Fukuoka, and he's a human quote machine, much like Bill Mollison. And one of his quotes is, "The real path to natural farming requires that a person know what unaltered nature is, so that he or she can instinctively understand what needs to be done and what must not be done to work in harmony with its processes." He started out, he cut his teeth being a plant biologist, a plant pathologist. And at one point he kind of had this sort of born again experience. He got pneumonia and he had some kind of vision, and at least according to some of his writings, translated by Western people. And he had to change the way things were done, the way he did things. He was the son of a small landholder, farming family, as many Japanese families were at that time. The family farmed principally, I believe, citrus and rice on like 5 acres, not a big place. He discovered these approaches that would allow him to produce grains like rice, but build soil instead of lose it, because typically soils are washed away when you're growing grain of any kind. At least a millimeter of topsoil a year. And of course, if you multiply that over 1,000 years, there goes your soil and your civilization usually. So nobody really wants that. But he could reverse that with a food forest, sort of with little inputs and high yields. And I've got a picture of ducks in a rice paddy on the left. And he would do the two together. So some people want to keep the waterfowl, keep the birds away from the rice. But Fukuoka's idea was to kind of integrate them, because what happens, it turns out after observation, is that the paddling movement of the ducklings stimulates the rice plants to produce big tillers or side shoots, and then sprouts. And duck manure fertilizes the soil. It eliminates any need for synthetic expensive fertilizers. The ducks eat harmful insects and weeds, so you don't need pesticides, and it's just kind of win after win after win. And he was always searching for ways to do less work rather than to do more. His system took a lot of years, beginning in the 1940s, a lot of trial and error. He wrote a book called The One Straw Revolution, which has been popularized into English, the English world. And his quotes are just phenomenally interesting. It was a very popular book, especially in Asia. It came out in 1975. He has passed away. He's got quotes like, "The ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings." Who doesn't want to read the words of somebody like that? And he thought everyone, to a degree, should be a farmer. By farmer, he meant farming or gardening on any scale. Very interesting. So the fourth big seed I'll briefly cover is an Australian man named P.A. Yeomans, very close geographically to Mollison, but vocationally very different. Yeomans was a miner. He did a lot of work in Southeast Asia, and he moved big amounts of earth and rocks with big machines and manipulated big volumes of water all over various landscapes. And he had a tax shelter. He had a farm back in his home country of Australia, which was suffering from drought. The country was, his farm was. And of course, his brother-in-law was the manager of his farm. And the drought led to brush fires, which took his brother-in-law's life. So that tragedy kind of gave him impetus to figure out, how can we do things different? How can we hydrate our landscapes, harnessing our technological abilities, our hydrocarbons, big machines, big ideas. And he did just that. He took dry landscapes, and you can see in the top left picture, surrounded by yellow, there's these little ponds on one of his original 2 properties. They're actually sizable ponds. It's just a small picture, connected by channels, and they dot the whole landscape. And there's trees all over the place. This particular picture doesn't have a lot of trees in it, but some of his pastures and paddocks, as they call them, do. And he could flood these fields and subfields almost whenever he wanted. He liked to do it in terms of moon phases, but the point is, instead of losing topsoil, he would build it measurably at the rate of up to a centimeter or even an inch per year, which is not what geologists tell us that we are able to do physically. And they had different tools like this funny looking plow, which would rip channels in the earth for water to soak into and air, and the microbes would be happy and the plants would be happy. And then if there were sheep or cattle eating the plants, they'd be happy and they'd leave their happiness in the form of manure, and just sort of, again, that virtuous cycle. So the sort of when the permaculture rubber hit the road was when these two fellows, Bill Mollison and his protege student, David Holmgren, got together. And Mollison, by this time, was this is the 80s. Well, he was a professor in the 1970s as well, but I think he met Holmgren in the early 80s. Maybe late 70s. No, actually, it was the late 70s. Montreal Olympics were happening, and these two guys were meeting up. I remember thinking that a different kind of mental gymnastic Olympics. But Holmgren was he'd be like today's equivalent of someone who's homeschooled. He was a very independent thinker, free spirit without being sort of crazy. And he needed a thesis paper. And they were talking. They'd met at some function by accident. And the student Holmgren thought, oh, this Mollison, I like the way he thinks. And Mollison said to Holmgren, the student, well, what about this for an idea? If in most places on the planet, nature creates some kind of forest as an optimal ecosystem response to climate and geology and landscape, so that nature can optimize production and biodiversity, why does agriculture then, if it doesn't actually look like a forest, why does it not at least function like a forest? For example, why is agriculture not dominated by perennial plants instead of annual plants? Holmgren, the student, said, aha, that's perfect. That's a design question that I can investigate, but it's fundamentally looking at the design that nature creates. And why don't we appear to be using that mandate in our prime activity on this planet, which is agriculture, by which we feed ourselves? So that started the permaculture per se ball rolling. They started thinking and writing and talking, and Mollison had a little property on the edge of the campus in Tasmania. And they started dreaming and employing people to come up with some designs and artists to come up with graphic representations of designs. And it all eventually led to a couple books and this Permaculture Designer's Manual, which you can see in the bottom right. Holmgren was the big thinker. Mollison was more of the publicist and the doer. Holmgren came up with ethics and principles. Well, they both did, but I think they were both involved in the three main ethics, which some folks have heard of, which are in the middle of this slide: care for the earth, care for people, and share the extra. So the easy way to remember that people often parrot is earth care, people care, fair share. The idea just being, if we take care of the earth and we take care of our neighbors, we do the right thing for each, there will be surplus that we can share. And it's a beautiful goal to strive for, and it sometimes can be proven that it is achievable, and it is usually achievable with these 12 permaculture principles, and they're represented by these little graphic pictures on the edge of the slide. And I won't go into detail on each one. You'd have to do a little more looking online or at some books to get deeply into those. But I'll just highlight the bottom one, which is produce no waste, which sounds, well, that's not necessarily permaculture-y, or is it? Well, there's a permaculture song I heard. It's by this self-styled artist. He's a permaculture musician. All his songs are about permaculture. Pretty jazzy little tunes, actually. And his one lyric is, "There's no such thing as waste, just stuff in the wrong place. No such thing as waste, just stuff in the wrong place." And I thought of that this morning as I was driving to the Outdoor Education Center when I heard CBC morning show interviewing a small brewery owner. I believe it's McKinnon and McKinnon, or McKinnon and Sons. I don't even know where they are, but their problem was they were producing excess carbon dioxide, and that's just a natural byproduct of the brewing process. The yeast ferment and give off carbon dioxide. And of course, it goes into the atmosphere and does not help the issues we are grappling with today, climate-wise. And additionally, until recently, they had to buy in carbon dioxide in tanks from another industry. So there's more energy and money going out of their profit stream. So they'd heard of an idea, and they found a machine somewhere, not usually for smaller breweries, but they kind of adapted and repurposed one. And it takes the CO2 that naturally occurs as a result of the fermenting process and captures it, and then later in the manufacturing process injects it into the fermented product, the beer, because everyone wants to have a little bit of carbonation in their beers. So it's win-win. They're saving money. They're not putting as much into the atmosphere. That's a great example of no waste. Anyway, enough of the principles. You can look into those on your own if you feel fit or feel inclined. I want to show you more pictures. Pictures are pretty fun. And Mollison and Holmgren really started gaining momentum, and permaculture as a movement started gaining momentum with the development of the permaculture design course, which Mollison and Holmgren kind of distilled down to a 2-week course, 72 hours, which is a mixture of conceptual ideas, academic learning, abstract thinking, and hands-on things, such as how to do things with tools. And there are a plethora of these courses all over the world. Every people group almost, well, that's an exaggeration, but if you're looking to find a permaculture design course and have a vacation of 2 weeks, there's a group for you somewhere. You can even do them online from your computer, like we're doing tonight. You'll just miss out on the hands-on part. Aaron and I came across a place that did such in 2010 when we were visiting college friends in Vermont, and it was about 10 acres, about the size of our property, and had similar goals and aims, and we visited, and it was beautiful. And lo and behold, they were doing the Fukuoka thing in Vermont, in like northern-ish North America. They had ponds, and they were growing rice with ducks, and we thought, whoa, this is something to check out. These folks have some serious design chops to be paid attention to. And 2 years later, after their first course, we didn't want to go to the first course because first courses are often, fraught with issues. We went to the second one, which was not fraught with issues. It was very well done. Whole systems design in Vermont. And we met lots of other students from North America there, various ages and stages, 20-something people, 30-something, 40-something, 50-something. I think there's probably a couple 60-something, various ethnicities represented. And you learn how to design, you learn how to apply your permaculture glasses to any landscape or any project or any proposed landscape or project in different scales, large and small. We did small gardens. We looked at their small town that they were located close to. And we were just joining. There's thousands and thousands of people across the world that do this. It's more prominent in some countries. Of course, it's pretty prominent in Australia, but not only. Latin America for sure, Europe for sure, Asia and Africa increasingly so. And they have a lot of principles they have us think through, or that you would think through. And I'm going to really briefly highlight a couple before showing you some people involved in permaculture. On the left here is the permaculture zones. So the other way of thinking of it is relative placement. What do you put where when you're designing your home, your garden, your yard, your town? And it actually mimics things that were done in the past in places like the Black Forest in Germany. course, areas needing continual observation and maintenance and shushing away potential predators or environments, that's zone 1. And zone 0 is your house. And zone 2, the yellow, less intensively managed areas. Maybe you've got some berry bushes that don't bear all year, just sometimes when they need attention. And out further, you've got some pastures, which don't need as much attention, that's intensive anyway, and so on and so forth to wilderness. And on the right, we had the sector analysis. The idea being there's these forces in nature that we should pay attention to, which oftentimes we don't. And that can be applied to a home scale, a farm scale, or even like your deck in your backyard. Where does the sun rise? Where does it set? Where do the cold winds come from? Where do the warm winds come from? What directions does most of the precipitation come from? So you can apply those to your deck or to a town. Another fun, frequent permaculture principle is doing a needs and yields analysis. And the example I cherry picked from the internet was a fruit tree. And well, what does a fruit tree need? Or sorry, what does it yield? Well, it yields fruit. It yields shade for grass and other grass-like plants. It yields insect nectar. It yields rodent food. It might yield rodents. It can yield insect food and insects. It can yield a windbreak, but it has needs that you have to be aware of when you're planning. Sunlight, early care in the early years, perhaps pruning, fertilizer, perhaps natural, hopefully natural, manure, compost, chopped nitrogen-bearing plants like clover, etc. All things that can be considered in the design phase. Next I have, and thank you for bearing with me. I know I'm going slightly long-windedly, but we're moving right along. A lot of folks associate some sort of classic or stereotypical concepts or ideas with permaculture. They put the two together. And one is an edible forest garden. And you can do that on a home scale. You can do that on a community scale. There's one actually by St. Andrew's Church, in Sound. The basic idea is use all the available space horizontally and vertically. So we've got the rhizosphere represented by the carrots. There's things that grow into the ground and below that you can eat or other beings can eat. There's things that grow along the ground like clover, mushrooms, strawberries. There's slightly taller herbaceous things, which use in your kitchen. There's slightly taller than that shrub things, which have more lignin or clippable berries and currants. There's lower trees, which will have smaller fruit and some nuts. And then you have sort of more of your classic canopy trees. They might be oaks. They might be like a large apple, not a small apple. That kind of thing. Use the vertical space that is available to you in a forest garden, especially depending on your size. And the size again, one of the neat things about permaculture is the scale is very manipulative. You can manipulate the scales. So got a picture of a pretty typical suburban lot coming up, and thanks Tara, she's got it. And on the left is it's just a little, what would it be, 30 feet by 30 feet maybe, and it doesn't look especially attractive. And afterwards on the right, a beautiful version of a forest garden, and looks like a lot of shrubs and herbaceous perennials there. And I'm sure it looks like there are some trees planted that will get bigger in time, and you have to account for the size that things will ultimately achieve and the management and that kind of thing. But the permaculture designs often need higher input at the start and money, of course, to establish something. But then the idea is over time, the cost decreases, the productivity increases, and the management becomes hopefully less and less. Stacking functions. I think I'm just going to blow by that a little bit for the sake of time. But if you're curious about my funny little livestock trailer on the right, you can email me. I'll tell you all about the multiple things it does. But the idea is one element in any landscape has to have many jobs. You can't have someone who only checks parking meters. You can't have a plant that only gives you one thing. Everything's got to do lots of jobs, wear many hats. Another classic permaculture idea is swales and berms. You can build a little ditch to drain water from your driveway, but then harness that water. You can build structures, landscapes and shapes to hold that water, and then grow trees or other plants with that water that is on the surface, or maybe it's just under the surface because of where you've deposited it, where you've dug your ditch, which could be as wide as a shovel or as wide as 3 bulldozers. Swales are a tree-based system, very interesting and a little bit controversial some places. Not so controversial as the last kind of permaculture stereotype I like to refer to. And the idea, and this is a quote from Mollison again, the problem is the solution. But it's a really neat way of thinking of challenges. So you've got dandelions, that is a big problem to some people. But of course, to others, it's cooked greens. It's maybe chicken feed. It's maybe something you can put in the compost. You got your problem is squirrels. Well, maybe now you have dog food, or at least fox or coyote food. Maybe you want those around for some reason. I'm not going to judge. You've got shredded paper. Well, instead of chucking it in the landfill, maybe it can be used for bedding or the beginning of compost anyway. So our last number of slides, I'm getting into actual people in the permaculture field who are far more famous than I, and with good reason. And they're doing and have done really interesting things. So Sepp Holzer is an Austrian gentleman, and he and his family have done all kinds of neat things in the Alps in Austria. The Alps are dominated by largely spruce monoculture plantations. So all the original forests were cut down. The Ministry of Forestry said, let's plant spruce. And so they did very successfully, but it's got very little biodiversity, very little productivity. And he was a keen, I would say, genius-like nature observer since he was a kid. And he thought, we can do better. I can do better. And so he's got all these ponds developed in these undulating terraces to grow crops. And they'll grow perennial crops. So you see some bare soil there. He will put wheat there, which is an annual, but it'll be an ancient wheat that's easier for animals to digest, gives more protein, leaves a stalk that can be used for more straw, on and on it goes. And of course, he'll turn that into pasture later, and there's fruit trees in the middle of this terrace and on the edges that animals can harvest depending on the year, or he will harvest depending on the year and the crop. Just amazingly productive and biodiverse landscapes. On the bottom right is a wetland complex style he's developed called the crater garden. And you make a big spot for all the excess water to go eventually, and then you build up these slopes and terraces and have plants anchor the soil to keep from eroding it. And you can have all kinds of fruit trees and other things growing in these very specially designed microhabitats. He purportedly grows lemons in Austria, and I have no reason to believe that that is a lie, because he knows what he's doing, and microclimates are really interesting. Aaron and I have a hot, dry spot on the southwest side of our house, and we planted grapes there, and they love it. And we give them almost zero love. We just keep taking and taking and taking. And that's nice. On the very different permaculturalists include Justin and Rebecca Rhodes, and their outfit that they run is called Abundant Permaculture, and they have DVDs and courses and classes and videos you can watch for free. One fun thing they did, they're in North Carolina, young family obviously. They took the kids out of school. I think they were homeschooled anyway, but so they took them out of the home, made the home into a bus, and toured across the United States and Canada looking for interesting, unique, small scale farms and homesteads doing permaculture things. Abundant Permaculture. I won't talk more about those folks, but they're interesting. Well, there he is with the chicken trailer tractor. He's got his kid in there, but he's popularized all these plans and free plans and ways to make growing things accessible to people, especially people who have no experience getting their hands dirty. Vandana Shiva, very powerful person, running parallel to the permaculture world, and she's been on permaculture boards. She sees everything she does as permaculture in terms of the growing spaces, including her organic farm where they keep seed banks and train people. They've trained, I think, around half a million people in beyond organic agricultural techniques and saving seeds. And I'd love to talk more about her, but you can Google her and just be blown away by her quotes too. Like, yeah. Americans should see that corporations abandoned them long ago, and that people have to build their own economies and rebuild democracy as a living democracy. The corporations belong to no land, no country, no people. They have loyalty to anything apart from. They have no loyalty to anything apart from their profits. And the profits today are on an unimaginable scale. It has become illegitimate criminal profits extracted at the cost of life. And that hits a lot closer to home in India than here, although it applies here as well. Vandana Shiva, amazing person. Permaculture is not without its critics, including those from inside the movement, if you can call it a movement. Here's Curtis Stone, pretty famous Canadian market gardener. And if you've kind of dabbled in it, studied it enough, read enough books, there are criticisms for sure that hold water. And I won't go too deep into those tonight, but it can be overly idealistic. Number one, it can be overly simplistic. For example, Fukuoka initially, when he started down this path, received the mandate to take care of his family's lemon orchard. And he saw that in nature, lemon trees are not pruned. And he decided, I will not prune the lemon trees. And there was an economic disaster after that. They made no money. And he realized, well, there has to be some effort, but it has to decrease over time. Number three criticism I have, permaculture calls it itself a design science, and it is, but it doesn't have a great protocol for implementing recommendations that it comes up with. There's a Canadian book that really gets to the heart of that and dealing with that, and you can ask me about it later if you want. Number four, I would say that permaculture is more germane to urban, suburban, and homesteading contexts and less so to larger agriculture. So, or as it's called, broad scale agriculture. I took a course a number of years ago from a pretty famous permaculturist that was moving into sort of larger agricultural realms, and the folks called themselves regrarians. And I said, I'm not sure if I should take another permaculture course or this regrarians course. And they said, well, if you're around 4 or 5 acres, permaculture can do you just fine. If you're a bit larger than that, you might want to take our course. Well, I was kind of right in the middle, and I took the course. It's nice to have more than one set of glasses. I am going to just flip through really quickly my last few slides, and then open it up to questions for people who are still here and awake. You can combine the worlds, agriculture and permaculture. You've got annual crops in these strips and trees growing bigger and bigger, bearing more and more and more. This used to be cornfield and soy field in Wisconsin. Mark Shepard, amazing guy. This is a Canadian example, cornfield on the right, where it's yellow, there's stuff not growing, soil not improving for months of the year, versus on the left, it is. And they've put some of these things into practice. And I want to give you some resources to think about or look into if you want. Oh, actually, benefits first. It's hope-filled. It's broad-minded. You can go into sites like permies.com, and there's every flavor of political spectrum. There's vegans, there's meat-only eating people, and they'll be online at the same time, often in the same forums, talking to each other. Plant-based, yes, yes. You have to play nicely or you're kicked out of permies.com. It's just really, it's not scary that way. You see, well, there's somebody in this group that's kind of like me, if you poke around long enough. Another thing I like about permaculture is it applies to multiple scales. On the left, you have how to deal with rainwater for your your patio, your deck, your small backyard or front yard. Or on the right, I have what I've planned for my 5-acre field. And you can go in scales beyond that too. I'm going to skip right down to, let's go one more, Tara. Let's skip the chicken picture. You can ask us about the crazy things we do with our chickens later if you want, but things you can look into. Introduction to permaculture courses. They are online. There are free ones. There are ones you can pay just a little bit for. You can go at your own pace, unlike tonight. Top right, we have Verge Permaculture out of Calgary, Alberta. Not Calgary only anymore, but they have lots of brilliant educational materials online. And on the bottom right, you can even have a free intro from Whole Systems Design, where Aaron and I did our permaculture design course 11 or so years ago. Moving down, if you're not as keen on electronic media, you can get books. And I don't know how many our library has, and I wish I could tell you, but they're not hard to come by on the internet, at least, ordering. There's like a $12 intro one, Permaculture for Beginners on the left, or Building a Better World in Your Backyard by the originator of Permies.com, Paul Wheaton, who has started a community and allows people to have some little chunks of land that they can play around with when they're young and don't have much money, and to publicize the results and the joys and the frustrations and the triumphs and the failures, all on Permies.com. Very interesting. And there's other community-based groups too. Eco Village in Caledon, they are very permaculture oriented. What can you do? You can link up with like-minded people. I've got these as resources in a page that Tara can give you if you get a hold of her on an email form. But there's a permaculture in Ontario map. Just put into your search engine permaculture in Ontario map. And there's local folks like Aaron and I with the following email, which is going to be on your resource page. There's Julie Lamberts at Lake Charles, Rooted by the Bluffs. Very excellent folks there that we have a lot in common with and enjoy getting together with. A little further afield in Meaford is Ivan Chan at Eden in Season, and he's got a website as well. Permies.com, as I mentioned, and a little more broadly thinking is the sustainabilityproject.ca. Lots of local folks involved in that. And it's, while it's not called a permaculture project, it essentially is, I would say. Things you can do, you can garden like a rebel. You can try not tilling your soil. You can cover it with mulch. You can plant cover crops. You can make biochar. You can make fruit tree guilds and swales. You can make a food forest. You can make these woody beds with chunks of wood covered with soil that eventually rot down and create more and better soil for you. So many things you can do with just a bit of snooping in books and online, or talking to people like Aaron and myself and Julie and other folks. I would argue that one of the best permaculture things you can do is support like-minded local food providers. And I have a big list of those, which is also on the resource pages that Tara has, many of whom you know and perhaps shop with and from already. So thank you for listening to me for longer than I thought you would. And I've just got some pictures here that Tara can scroll through if she wants. If there's any questions that any people have.
So just feel free that if you have any questions to ask, that you are certainly welcome to ask them at this point in time. If you have practical questions about how to get started with permaculture, for example, that might be something to ask about. I know that the WI, I don't know if everybody's familiar with our building. So we have a hall that is down in the metropolis of Copeways Bay. And attached to that property, we have about 5 acres, 3 to 5 acres in behind the building that currently are home to a tennis court, but then there's also a bunch of open field in the back of that as well. And we have been sort of playing around with and discussing the idea of opening up a food garden and opening up that property to do some really interesting things on. So something like this might be something that that we could use as an experimental spot to get started with permaculture. So that's something that that we'll have to really consider and talk about.
And Tara, if people feel if people want to type questions in the chat, that'd be great too. I don't have access to that right now, so you'd have to read those out. But I'd also just like to say that what you've organized tonight, this forum, is really permaculture, just community building, thinking green thoughts, thinking forward, thinking how can we integrate some of these things together is just brilliant. It's the way to be going forward, I think.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those pieces that that we really have to start thinking about in terms of how we're going to manage manage the way that we sort of continue with our food and you know, other kinds of crises that maybe we're dealing with that we don't want to have to consider. So
Yeah, I should say too that certainly permaculture isn't exclusively designed or preoccupied with food, even though it, according to me tonight, probably you might think it is. But a lot of the other subjects are more twinned with other streams in the public sphere, and not so difficult necessarily to buy into or find information on. A famous professor, poet, and I would say prophet out of the States, Wendell Berry, has said, eating is an agricultural act. He's also said, like, it's the physical activity we all share, and how we get our food largely determines how the world is used. That's a paraphrase, but I think if there's one area to hit, that's the one I'm going to focus on the most. So the others are good too, but let's eat and drink well.
So I've just posted up the list of resources that that Peter has been so kind to provide for us. And if anybody's interested in getting a copy of this document, it's I've turned it into a PDF as well. So if you would like me to send this document to you, I'm certainly happy to do that. You can just shoot us an email at our WI email address, which is culpoisbaywi@gmail.com, or you can just sort of let me know in the chat if this is something that you're interested in having, and then I can make arrangements to send it to you as well. But
and Tara, speaking of the resources, I didn't include any video resources. There's so many, YouTube, whatever. You just have to go into your search engine and start typing permaculture anything. And there's so many things that come up. It's occasionally slightly bewildering. But I tried to distill main thrusts and guardrails and ideas and people in permaculture in our introduction tonight.
The only other thing that I'm going to say, first of all, thanks to Peter for providing all of that great historical background and sort of in-depth information. That was a lot of stuff to take in one night, and so I'm really there's a lot to process there, and I've got some good ideas. I was talking with Peter the other day about the fact that this is what I want my backyard to look like now that I have, you know, a space back there that I'm not really happy with in terms of the fact that it's just basically grass that I have to cut all the time, and I don't want to do that anymore. And so I'm just trying to find ways to not have to cut the grass, and I feel like permaculture is an excellent option for that. So thanks, Peter. Thanks for all that great information. We're really happy to have you come and join us tonight. Okay. That brings us to the end of our evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to join us. We're really happy to have you here. And thanks again to Peter, and thanks to the Ontario government for giving us money to cover the cost of these. And we hope that you found this enlightening and insightful and informative, and that you'll join us again for another one of our presentations.
And thank you, Tara, for facilitating and holding my hand.
No problem.